I'd been trying to shrug off on therapists' couches for years, stubbornly solidified after my first daughter was born, and some of them started getting in the way. You'd think I would have expected this, I who'd spent the prior 3 years speaking and writing about the significance of transitional events such as marriage and motherhood in a motherless daughter's life. Still, I wasn't prepared for how similar the frustration and anger I felt in 1997 when Maya screamed non-stop for her first 10 weeks would feel to the global despair that consumed me after my mother's death in 1981. I also hadn't anticipated the sort of existential aloneness I felt during the postpartum period, even with my cousin and my mother-in-law providing help. Once I became a mother, my own mother was suddenly nowhere and everywhere all at once. Even the most mundane elements of infant care brought her into the room. How had she managed with cloth diapers, I wondered, as I struggled with the disposable kind? As I paced the floor with Maya at 3 a.m., I would involuntarily muse, this must have been how she held me in the middle of the night. When I wrote Motherless Daughters in the early 1990s, I included a chapter on motherless mothers, but writing it was more of an intellectual endeavor than an engagement with emotional truth. As a single childless woman, I didn't yet appreciate how the experience of early mother loss would one day shape me as a parent. It has influenced everything from the partner I chose, someone who I was certain would care for children attentively in the event something bad happened to me, to the obsessive baby books I keep for my daughters, recording every small detail so they'll have that information in the event something bad happens to me, to my decision to take Maya to France by myself when she was 3, so she would have an early memory of travel with her mother in the event something bad happens to me, to the way I brush the girl's hair every morning, in styles easy for my husband to replicate in case something bad happens to me soon. It has also made me, I believe, a much more conscientious mother than I would otherwise be, one who tries hard to anticipate my children's needs and constantly attempts to shield them from disappointment or despair. Because I know what it feels like to long for a mother, I try to compensate for my daughters by always being there. True, aiming for supermom status can be exhausting for a working mother, and it definitely cuts into a workday when you stubbornly insist on doing the half-hour preschool drop-off and pick-up each day, even though a husband or babysitter would gladly make the trip. But I know how precious our time together is, mainly because I know how suddenly it could be taken away. At 41, I'm only 1 year younger than my mother was when she died, and that mental math figures into the background of most parenting decisions I make. It isn't exactly a palpable fear of dying young that steers me, as much as the constant background awareness that such a thing could happen. Like most of the motherless mothers I've met while researching this book, I don't go through the day obsessing about my health or my mortality, and I've even gotten pretty lax about doing monthly breast self-exams. Who has time for all that anymore? I do, however, invest a considerable amount of energy in self-preservation. One woman I know, a mother of 3 who lost her father in a car accident when she was 8, describes her parenting style as one that emphasizes economy of movement. Knowing from an early age that crisis can appear without warning, she shies away from unnecessary risk. I know exactly what she means. I always drive the speed limit. I won't fly in small planes. Bad things can happen to mothers, I know. The most important part of my job as a parent, I believe, is to stick around. A mother dies of breast cancer when her daughter is 17. The father, though well-meaning, retreats into his own world. The daughter, already a chronic overachiever, throws herself into schoolwork. 1 year later, she escapes to college. Years of staunch self-sufficiency follow, along with a string of romantic relationships, each of which abruptly ends when one partner or the other gets overly attached, panics, and flees. Then there's graduate school and several stints in therapy to wrestle with all those years of unresolved grief. A move to the big city, more relationships, a high-powered career. Then comes a man, unlike the others, who is not afraid to pledge eternal love. There's an unexpected pregnancy, a wedding, a birth, and, suddenly, like the miracles she long ago stopped believing in, a new family is born. I've often thought that if my first daughter hadn't arrived as a surprise, I might never have had a child at all. Though I'd passionately wanted to create the mother-child bond I'd lost, the immense responsibility of parenthood unnerved me. How would I possibly find the patience and devotion I'd need, given that I'd been unmothered by anyone but myself for so long? How could I find enough faith to believe that what happened to my mother so young wouldn't also happen to me? Loss, real and imagined, is part of a motherless mother's landscape in a way that most friends, husbands, and coworkers can't understand. A baby's high fever, or a mother-in-law's offhand critical comment, or a teenage daughter's struggle for independence triggers a response in a motherless daughter that might not be triggered in her peers. When Maya was 3 months old, I joined a Mommy and Me group, and every Tuesday we 20 new mothers sat in a sloppy circle talking about breastfeeding and bottle feeding, motor development, and preschool wait lists. While all this was undeniably helpful, I had an additional list of urgent subjects to discuss. Can you get a mammogram if you're breastfeeding, or do you have to wait? Whom should you name as the legal guardian for a child in your will? How do you even draft a will? I can imagine the response I'd receive if I were to blurt out spontaneously, "Ever since Maya's birth, I've been nearly overcome with fear that one of us is going to die." Just the idea of the sudden silence, the polite smiles, and the quick change of subject was enough to keep me quiet. Mommy and Me is many good things, but it's not a good place to discuss dying young. Which is not to say that thoughts like these don't occur to all new mothers. They do. They just don't surface with the same frequency or intensity or with the same emotional charge. As Gina Moreau, Ph.D., an associate professor of psychology at Johnson State College in Johnson, Vermont, who lost her own mother at age 3, explains, all engaged mothers, meaning all those who are engaged in the process of mothering, worry. But motherless mothers worry for a different reason. Most of my girlfriends who have kids still have their mothers, and we talk a lot about what we're doing with our kids and about the different issues we have with them. But the reasons I worry are filtered through the lens of having lost a parent, whereas that's not the case for them. Being a good mother ranks high among most motherless mothers' goals, to be the mothers they didn't get to have, and to be the mothers their mothers didn't get the chance to become. When Moreau compared 30 motherless mothers with 26 mothers whose mothers were still alive, she found that the mother loss group was more preoccupied with their roles as mothers than the other women were, and were also more focused on how well they were doing as mothers. They were more concerned that maybe they weren't doing a good job, but that didn't mean they weren't, Moreau says. They also reported they were trying hard. They wanted to do it right because they feared so much that they wouldn't. So it seemed as if they had a compensatory behavior, and because their children looked okay in comparison with the other children, there was some evidence that perhaps these mothers were compensating. In other words, they were kind of hard on themselves, but they seemed to be doing the good job they were afraid they weren't doing. This impulse to overcompensate is a common trait among motherless mothers. From the start, many of them feel somehow less able, less equipped, or less prepared for parenting than their peers. If I haven't received mothering in such a long time, they reason, how will I know how to give it? How will I know what decisions to make and which to avoid? Without a living mother to rely on for guidance or advice, they feel as if they're starting out with a deficit other mothers don't have to overcome. I wish I could take credit for the term motherless mothers, but a man who spent time among monkeys deserves that honor. In the 1970s, psychology professor Harry Harlow and his associates at the primate laboratory at the University of Wisconsin set out to study what happened to infant monkeys who were separated from their mothers soon after birth and were raised instead with surrogate mothers sculpted either from wire or cloth. When these infant monkeys grew up and gave birth, these motherless mothers, as Harlow called them, were either negligent or abusive to their firstborn offspring. They showed no ability to nurse, rock, or comfort their young. Some even violently and fatally bit their babies. Deprived of an emotional connection since birth, these monkeys were unable to bond with their firstborn infants. In its simplest reduction, this theory suggests that children completely deprived of affection or nurturing are likely to grow into adults who have impaired or non-existent bonds with their own firstborn children. But what about those who did receive good mothering, only to lose it? Or those who received inconsistent or unpredictable mothering from the start, inadequate but still more than nothing? What effect might this have on the way they raise children of their own, and on the children they raise? There is little doubt that early parent loss affects the way daughters interact with their own offspring. As Maxine Harris, Ph.D., a clinical psychologist in Washington, D.C., and the author of The Loss That Is Forever, has explained, the struggles of raising the next generation are the struggles of the human race. They become even more complicated when a mother or father has lost a parent in childhood.